So when Emily presented sort of a subject-specific lens from our project, I'm presenting some broad themes that are arising in our examination of factors that influence the uptake of professional education for out-of-field teachers. So I'm specifically tonight with Emily talking about public discourse and subject specialisation. You can see here there's a big team. Our rotation of authorship changes depending on who's leading various bits or who puts their hands up to do things. But it's all very collaborative, and we all have input into the work that comes forth from the project. But particularly from the presenting authors, Emily, thank you for joining me tonight. Jana, apologies, she's sick. Seamus, I believe, is elsewhere in the world at the moment, but also Karen, our most recent recruit to the project, and thank you for the help that you've given in formulating some of those slides as well. So to acknowledge that we are zooming in from different country across Australia, for me in Sydney in the lower North Shore, joining from lands of the Camaragal people. So here's an overview about what I hope to cover in 20 minutes. That may be a bit ambitious, but we'll see how we go. So with this nationally funded project through the Australian Research Council, we're examining the problem of the culture of professional education for out-of-field teachers. So we already know that out-of-field teaching occurs and teachers are required or allocated to teach classes that are different or beyond their area of training, qualifications or specific expertise. This can be subject or stage level, and we're looking at it really in the context of subjects. And the subjects represented across the team are English, geography, mathematics and science. Whilst we know out-of-field teaching occurs, what we are not so sure about is who's responsible for it and what can be done to support out-of-field teachers, and how can this support for them be maximised and provided in a time of great complexity, difficulty and challenge in Australia's education and teacher workforce, and at the time of what we know to be a teacher shortage. So what I'm presenting today comes out of two of our key research questions. What factors influence teacher uptake of professional education by out-of-field teachers? And what is the ecology of an education system that values diverse pathways towards teachers becoming in-field? So I guess probably we've got some more insights at the moment due to the nature of our study around question one, but we're starting to gain some brief insights as to what an ideal system could look like. In Australia, often, I'll just preface it that due to a lot of funding models, if you're teaching out of field, it's not always the case that you're able to access professional learning for that, as things are sort of targeted towards your subject specialisation or school priorities, which may be around literacy and numeracy or something like that. So we're really interested in understanding how and why and what out-of-field teachers do to upskill themselves. So we've got a three-phase study, and what I'm reporting on behalf of the team today comes from our interview study, so from our phase one. We've all done the literacy and policy review, which kind of set the scene first of all. The national survey is imminent and the Delphi study later on, so we're still firmly within the first phase of research at the moment. So after an analysis of literature and policy, we were able to develop an analytical framework. So after reading through, book chapters, journal articles, policy documents, professional association websites, grey literature, all sorts of things, we could see 6 common categories come through quite strongly. So public discourse, subject specialisation, the education system, professional education, entry to and staying in the profession, and implications and effects of out-of-field teaching. So like I said, today we'll be dealing with the public discourse and the subject specialisation area of this analytical framework in response to findings that have emerged from the interview study. We've also got a theoretical framework that we're working with, which is Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model. So we've been in the process of articulating where the sections from the analytical framework have best fit within the ecological systems model. So the interview study, what was it and how did we go about it and who was part of it? So we had purposefully sampled participants. In the end, we were able to recruit 37 participants to the interview study. We tried to get as much equal representation as we could across the states represented by the team and therefore in the study. So from Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. And where possible, we tried to get as best we could, equal representation across the subjects, which, as I said before, were mathematics, science, English and geography. But of course, 37 doesn't split nice and evenly, but we did the best that we could with availability and those that we knew from the field and those who responded to the call. Members of the project team conducted the interviews. We had spent a long time with each other working out the interview protocol and you know, the different groups of participants that we knew would be in the study. And we had agreed that the interviews would be conducted within a 60-minute time frame. 22 participants, or 22 of the 37 participants, were working in professional education already, whether that be at a state or national level. And this included from higher education, either or they may have run their own professional learning business, a private provider, or they may have been a volunteer in a subject-focused professional association, such as the English Teachers Association or the Science Teachers Association of Australia. 15 of our 37 participants were working in a policy context. And again, this could have been at a state or national level. And these were drawn from curriculum authorities, unions, or our sector authorities. So in Australia, we've got 3 sectors of education, independent, government, and Catholic. And when we came to the data analysis, we were doing deductive and inductive coding. And obviously we started with the analytical framework to see what of the themes from the literature were clearly coming through in our interview responses. You'll see in the orange text up here, it probably should go more in the findings, but I put it here because it fit, is that we've spoken a lot throughout the symposium about the strength of teacher identity. And we found that a lot of the participants, all of them, well, most of them actually were former teachers, and a lot of them reverted to their former self as a teacher who'd also had the experience of teaching out of field. And this had then propelled them often into what they were doing now and the reason that they were recruited as a participant to the study. All right. So when we were looking at the results from the 37 from the interviews with the 37 participants, okay, we could see these areas come out quite strongly. Subject knowledge and subject specialisation, qualifications and curriculum alignment, right the way through to implications arising from curriculum alignment and the design of initial teacher education programs. Lots of things ultimately came down to context, whether that be sort of school organisational structures and or leadership teams, okay, and also the way in which we define and identify and perceive out-of-field teaching. We noticed there was a lot of fragmentation and arguments between the ideas. It's very complex. There's no one single answer. And we also noticed that a lot of the challenge was structural and deeply embedded within systems. Yet we're seeing that the teacher agency and the belief in self and the decisions that they want to make and the sort of desire to be this good teacher and to do the best that they can was really instrumental in helping them overcome constraints and challenges that they were facing. We found relationships between identity, confidence, and then stigma around the use of language of out-of-field teaching. So, you know, we think that sometimes it's helpful to call that, but is there a stigma attached to such nomenclature? And that partnerships were underutilised. Overall, from the interviews, what we discovered was that there really is a big need for a future-focused ecosystem approach that will celebrate and facilitate a culture of professional learning for out-of-field teachers. So I'll speak to public discourse, and in a couple of slides, I'm going to throw to Emily, who talk about the subject specialisation. So you'll remember from the analytical framework that in the public discourse section, it was further broken up into categories. So teacher workforce, teacher capacity, teacher awareness, and teacher responsibility. We found these themes of inevitability, instability, and partnerships arising. And the tensions for that was that it was around a hierarchy of acceptance. So we found that this inevitability is just kind of this public discourse amongst teachers in professional associations, within curriculum authorities and so on, that it's part of life. It's a reality of being in the teaching profession, and it's a reality of some subjects more than others. And so at times, this inevitability perhaps causes complacency, but also it's just it's a fact of life. It's a fact of being in the profession. But with that inevitability comes this disruption and instability, because the terminology used, I mean, out-of-field teaching is the definition that we have, is the terminology that we have. But sometimes there's the stigma attached to that. So not always is it seen as helpful to declare yourself as an out-of-field teacher to a group of in-field teachers. Or if you're promoting, you know, a professional learning event for out-of-field teachers, does that mean nobody else can come? So it's starting to think about things like, is it new to the teaching of? And so new to the teaching of mathematics or science, geography or English, can cater for perhaps those who've been teaching for a very long time and may be new to the teaching of geography, those who have just graduated and new to teaching overall and subjects. So we're really sort of exploring these ideas through the interview about terminology and rebranding of this name, because at times it just creates more instability and is not always helpful to the cause. We also found that from those associated with professional associations, that there was this tension between, you know, the in-field members who pay often quite a lot to be part of the association, yet the responsibility that the professional associations feel to be able to cater and a need to cater for out-of-field teachers. And often that is done at a reduced cost and sometimes for free, which then causes sort of further instability within the ranks of the professional associations as well, because sometimes there's a feeling that maybe the in-field teacher needs are not being as well catered for when there's the, you know, the priority, if you like, or the need given to out-of-field teacher. We also felt that, we found from the interviews that within initial teacher education, there wasn't a lot of preparation and awareness raising happening about teaching out of field, and that the AITSL standards at the moment don't kind of give room for this out of field teaching phenomenon. So overall, what we found around public discourse was that a more coordinated approach is required between, you know, initial teacher education providers, professional associations, schools, and policy. And that we also found that gentle enablers, so the person themselves, are probably the most instrumental in finding ways to navigate through and find the opportunities to upskill themselves. So when we're looking at the contradictions, okay, I won't read through all of them, otherwise Emily will never get a go. But you can see there's this, but then that. Okay, so yes, it's inevitable, but it's undesirable. Okay, it is a shared responsibility, but the action is fragmented. Initial teacher education should take the lead in preparing teachers for the incidence of out-of-field teaching, okay, but the accreditation standards and professional teaching standards work against this. Professional associations want to support and upskill out-of-field teachers, but then there's the cost, time, benefits constraints, and in some instances, hostility from the in-service teachers. So these contradictions around what it is and what it could be, you know, were coming through quite strongly in the public discourse. So Emily, I think it's you're up now for subject specialisation.
Thanks, Susan. From the subject specialisation, there is a few different areas, as Susan just talked about with public discourse, that we found as emerging themes. One particularly around specialisation itself and that nature of the knowledge base or the content knowledge that's assumed the teachers will come with. And a lot of the commentary that we saw was about people who we interviewed talking about the qualification gaps, the systemic shortages, the evolving expectations, and that teachers often facing challenges due to that insufficient content knowledge, especially when perhaps teaching across different levels. And there were many examples of that within, say, maths, that, you know, nature of being stretched into the senior mathematics area as opposed to what you're being asked to do in, say, a year 7 or year 8 class. Interestingly, that's where we see a lot of the out-of-field teachers landing within mathematics, is that year 7, year 8, where it seems as if we can hide them within the lower levels of mathematics, so to speak, even though there is a recognition of how important that foundational knowledge is for our students to then develop their skills and want and desire to keep connecting into the higher levels, into senior secondary mathematics. Something that was really interesting to us as we started to analyze the data was that there was a highlighting of the importance of identity and affinity, as some of the people who were making decisions about who might be given the out-of-field class were talking about some of the decision-making processes behind it. They almost started describing a hierarchy, that we start with, you know, the in-field teacher first, and then when we have to put the out-of-field teacher in, let's at least find someone who likes the subject or who has some sort of affinity or interest for the subject before we go to the people, the teachers who are qualified but have no interest. So this sort of unspoken hierarchy of selection and placement started emerging. But one of the things we found particularly interesting, and we certainly want to go and explore further, is what happens within the leadership space at this stage, particularly for middle managers, because there is a degree of what we saw of pragmatism, that these middle managers have the responsibility. So people like heads of departments for particular subjects or heads of faculty, they have a bit of a responsibility that they certainly feel to supporting these teachers, but also have this desire to ensure that the students are not affected by having these teachers in place. So what they end up doing is absorbing the responsibility. They take on the responsibility for helping to train these teachers or to support them or to do some of their planning or take on some of their marking or even just provide them with resources, so as those students, those teachers, sorry, feel supported. But at the same time, those sort of reactive strategies are also masking some of the problem and hiding it from the upper levels of management who don't see the degree of the issue, because these middle managers are coming in and trying to soak up what's happening. We started talking about it a bit as buffering, because they're absorbing the impact. On the screen at the moment and on the next screen as well, the orange text is actually quotes from some of the participants talking about some of their experiences. In terms of teaching experiences, many participants describe similar scenarios. Teachers stepping into unfamiliar subjects with strong general teaching skills, but lacking the specific content knowledge or pedagogical content knowledge to feel confident. And confidence was very much an issue that kept arising, or a theme that kept arising within the data that we were analysing. It's certainly described as leading to stress, identity tension, and a sense of being underprepared. But despite this, teachers were showing really strong, or the participants were talking about teachers showing strong agency, seeking out mentors, seeking out resources and professional learning to try and bridge those gaps. But as you can see, that led to some negative stories. And that first quote there, particularly, around that feeling of, I approached this with optimism. I took it on. I thought it was something I could learn. And now in hindsight, I think, oh goodness, what have I done? I taught the misconceptions I held myself. So we started to see some of the teacher stories and negative impact coming through. But it's certainly, that bottom quote in particular really hits home of how these teachers feel, and as Susan was talking about before, within the public discourse, how some of this terminology leaves these teachers feeling that that particular teacher was talking about that her colleagues had been told, well, look, can you just sit here and effectively babysit for us while we go find a proper teacher? Even though these people are absolutely proper teachers in their own right, but in their field of expertise. So again, we started seeing contradictions, an affinity versus qualification, confidence at the time versus regret in retrospect, coming through from how these teachers were feeling and how these people are describing other teachers that they have observed over time. I'm going to keep moving because I know we don't have a lot of time. So Susan, can I have the next slide, or would you like to take on the next slide?
You go. You're on a
No,
roll. You go, Emily.
I'll keep going. So one of the things we started to note, particularly between these two areas of public discourse and subject specialisations, and no doubt you've already started to get the sense of the punchline here, is that there are very similar contradictions coming through. And we mapped them through to find there was sort of themes that emerged from across these two areas, as Susan and I and others who were doing this particular analysis in these themes were seeing this sense of real synergies between the issues. And we brought them down to three areas: responsibility, inevitability, and masking. And I'll just give you a very brief interlude into each of those areas. So on the next slide, we talk about how responsibility for addressing out of field is widely acknowledged across the system. Yes, we've got to do something about it, but no one seems to take ownership. No one seems to have ownership. It all seems to be everyone else's issue or everyone else's responsibility. Like the professional education provided there from New South Wales, nobody is currently responsible, but even more hitting home, the Queenslander at the bottom saying, it's no man's land, isn't it? It's just how it is. No one owns it. No one has it. No one has responsibility for it. There seems to be a bit of without a coordinated action and policy alignment, that responsibility for out of field became a bit of a paradox. Everyone responsible, no one owning. In terms of masking, as I spoke about a little before, we saw these curriculum leaders absorbing the impact, but without a lack of formal recognition for what they were doing. This is why we want to do a little bit more in this area, because we can see that these people are having to take on extra work without any of that support. So what's happening for them? What's the impact of out of field teaching, where others are in the out of field domain, but they're having to accommodate what's happening. And so we've, again, that sort of idea, the higher education provided there in Victoria talking about that disconnect between what they're having to do versus what they're having to do it with, and how they're having to absorb that for themselves. And then finally, in terms of inevitability, as Susan described from the public discourse, there seems to be an absolute understanding that this is going to happen, but the systems and structures that are in place don't really have avenue to support that or to allow for it. And gradually, more and more, we're finding there is squeezing of places where that could be done. Nearly 12 hours ago, I was presenting to a panel for our accreditation of our program with the latest government, federal government involvement in initial teacher education, asking us to squeeze in 36 more areas of core content, none of it really thinking about these sorts of inevitable practices that are happening within in-service teachers at this point in time. Which leads us to these sort of sad quotes that you see with that professional PE provider in Queensland talking about if you're breathing and you've got a pulse and you've been a teacher, you can teach anything. It's not all doom and gloom, I promise. We do have positivity here in Australia, but what we're seeing is there's a negative impact here. There's an impact of the negative public perception of teachers in general that seems to be spilling over into this as well. And it's not really surprising necessarily, but at the same time, it's hard to watch when you know these people are trying to do their best. They're put into a situation that's not of their own making. So trying to raise that profile by showing the full impact across the entire ecosystem, we see as an opportunity to start to try and bring it up to the fore and talk about it from this